Hey, what's going on, church family? It's Sean Shetler here, and today I wanted to talk with y'all about Joshua chapter 10. It's a very complicated and complex Bible passage, and I believe it has a variety of interpretations due to its dramatic and supernatural elements and theological significance. The passage describes the miraculous event where Joshua prays for the sun to stand still in order to secure Israel's victory over the Amorite kings. It can be interpreted in several ways, each shedding light on different aspects of the text. Here are at least four potential interpretations scholars and theologians and readers might consider when approaching this text in Joshua 10. The literal historical interpretation. One traditional way to interpret Joshua 10 is a literal historical event. In this view, the text describes a miraculous supernatural act where God stops the motion of the sun, suspending the natural order of the cosmos for a period of time. This view holds that the miracle happened exactly as described. The sun paused in the sky to allow the Israelites to finish their battle with the Amorites. This interpretation typically emphasizes God's power over nature and history. The event shows that God can intervene in the most natural of processes to achieve his divine purposes. For those whose view of the Bible as divinely inspired historical record, this interpretation affirms the biblical account as fact, asserting the miracles like the halting of the sun are within God's capability and serve as signs of divine authority. Interpretation 2. Theological and symbolic. A second way to interpret Joshua 10 is to focus on its theological and symbolic meaning. Here, the focus is less on the literal mechanics of the event and more on what the sun standing still symbolizes. The halting of the sun can be seen as a powerful symbol of God's authority over the cosmos and his ability to control the forces of nature. The sun, often viewed as a symbol of divine power or the presence of God, for example, in the Psalms and prophetic literature, standing still might represent God's active participation in the battle, showing that he is at the center of Israel's victory. This interpretation also connects to the larger narrative of God's covenant with Israel, showing that God is fulfilling his promises to his people. The miracle in this case is not necessarily about the mechanics of the sun itself, but about Israel recognizing God's sovereignty and faithfulness in securing victory over the enemies that stand in the way of his people. It could also reflect themes of spiritual victory, God giving his people the time and means to overcome spiritual obstacles as the Israelites faced physical ones. Interpretation 3. Ancient Near Eastern literary context. A third interpretation places the story within the broader context of ancient Near Eastern literature and storytelling conventions. In this view, the event is understood as part of a larger epic tradition, similar to those found in Babylonian, Assyrian, and Canaanite texts, in which heroes, or gods with a little g, perform impossible feats to secure victory in battle. In many ancient stories, gods with a little g intervene in human affairs and control natural phenomena to demonstrate their supremacy over other gods and human enemies. In the context of Joshua chapter 10, this interpretation argues that the description of the sun standing still might be a form of literary exaggeration or symbolic language used to highlight the greatness of God's intervention. Rather than a literal suspension of the sun, the passage could be understood as an artistic or rhetorical way of describing the Israelites' victory as so overwhelming and complete that it was as if time itself had stopped to allow them to triumph. This interpretation would suggest that the story is more about the symbolic power of God's intervention than a physical interruption of the cosmos. Interpretation 4. Allegorical or spiritual interpretation. A fourth possible interpretation is an allegorical or spiritual one. In this view, the events in Joshua 10 are not necessarily meant to be read as a literal history or even as symbolic of God's direct intervention in nature. Instead, The story can be seen as an allegory for the spiritual life of the believer or the journey of God's people through difficult circumstances. The stopping of the sun could represent moments when God provides his people with supernatural strength, insight, or clarity in times of spiritual struggle. Just as the Israelites needed time to complete their battle, believers might interpret this passage as a reminder that God can provide the spiritual resources needed to overcome obstacles or challenges. The stopping of the sun then could be read as a metaphor for God's ability to pause or interrupt the ordinary flow of life to help his people achieve victory over sin, doubt, or external pressures. For the contemporary church, this could be seen as a reminder that God is present and active in the lives of his people, providing moments of divine assistance in times of need, whether through direct intervention or through his guidance and provision. Conclusion: multiple layers of meaning. Joshua 10 is a rich and layered text that can be interpreted in several ways depending on the theological, historical, and literary lenses through which one approaches it. Each of these interpretations, literal, theological, literary, and allegorical, offer a different aspect of understanding in the passage. The literal historical emphasizes God's miraculous power and the real physical event of the sun standing still. The theological or symbolic focuses on the spiritual and symbolic significance of God's sovereignty and intervention. The ancient Near Eastern literary context places the story within the wider cultural context of epic and mythic storytelling, understanding it as a rhetorical device. And interpretation 4, allegorical and spiritual, sees the passage as a spiritual lesson, offering a metaphorical insight into God's intervention in the lives of believers. These different interpretations don't necessarily contradict each other, but rather offer a fuller, multifaceted understanding of how God's revelation and relationship with his people can be expressed in different ways. For the contemporary church, it serves as an invitation to explore not only the historical aspects of the Bible, but also as a deeper, ongoing spiritual relevance. The famous professor Dr. John Walton suggests the Bible may not have been written directly to us, but it was certainly written for us, offering timeless lessons in every age. Thank you so much, and God bless.